Namaskaram, Michael.
Namaskaram.
Yeah. Today we are having the sixth meeting in a series of, in total, 8 meetings, where we talk about 8 essential imports of Bhagavan's teachings. And you mentioned them in an introduction that you wrote on my request when I compiled the book independently and published it based on various explanations you gave about Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu. And today we're going to talk about the sixth key point. But I thought it would be smart for everyone who's watching to read out the first 5 before I read out the sixth. And anyone who wants to watch the previous videos that we had about the key points can watch them on the playlist about these 8 key points. And I think nowadays you can find them in the podcast. So the first essential import is what actually exists is only ourselves as we actually are. The second is what we actually are is just pure existence awareness, Sat Chit, which is what always shines as our own being, our fundamental awareness, I am, and which is the infinite fullness of perfect happiness, Ananda. The third one is we seem to be not aware of ourselves as we actually are, only because we now seem to have risen as ego, whose nature is to be always aware of itself as I am this body, and consequently aware of the appearance of other things. Since ego is an erroneous awareness of ourself, it can be eradicated only by correct awareness of ourself, which means awareness of ourself as we actually are. Since we seem to be only ego, this is the fifth one, since we seem to be ego only so long as we attend to and are therefore aware of anything other than ourselves, we can be aware of ourselves as we actually are, and thereby eradicate ego only by attending to ourselves so keenly that we thereby cease to be aware of anything else whatsoever. So we already discussed those 5 key points. And by the way, if people want to read that introduction, you have a slightly adjusted version on your blog site, published on the 10th of September in 2024. So the key point for today, the sixth one, is everything other than our own being, I am, is just an illusory appearance that seems to exist only in the view of ourself as ego. So all such things seem to exist only when we rise and stand as ego, and hence none of them exist at all when we do not rise as ego. So this seems we are getting that to the heart of the problem.
Yes.
So if you want to clarify what this key point means, according to your understanding and what Bhagavan wrote about it, I think we're all happy to hear that.
Okay. This is a theme running throughout Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu. I will talk about. There won't be time to talk about all the verses, but I'll talk about some of the verses that that state this more or less implicitly. In the first verse, that's verse 1, the first verse of the main text, what Bhagavan says is, because we see the world, accepting one fundamental that has a power that becomes many is certainly the one best option. The picture of names and forms, the one who sees, the cohesive screen and the pervading light, all these are he who is oneself. He here refers to the one fundamental that he talks about in the first sentence. So what he is saying here, he begins by saying, because we see the world. That is, we see a world of multiplicity. We who see the world, though he uses the plural we here, he's using it as an inclusive form of the first person singular, because we each experience one first person. So we experience ourselves as a subject, knowing this myriad of objects or phenomena. So there's one seer and a multiplicity of things seen. Seer here means perceiver, one who knows. So we through the five senses, we perceive a world of multiplicity. So since it's one seeing many, the simplest explanation of all this is that there is one fundamental reality, and that fundamental reality has a power that enables it to be seen as many. Though Nana Shakti literally means a power that becomes many, but it implies a power that appears as many, because the one fundamental is always one fundamental. So that one fundamental is the reality of ourself as the seer. And so we experience ourselves as the seer, as one, experiencing all this multiplicity. So that's why he says, accepting one fundamental that has a power that becomes many is certainly the one best option. This is often translated that this is certain, but that is not what Bhagavan isn't going to say. This is certain because or this is certainly acceptable to everyone or something. Many people have different view. That's what he talks about in the next two verses, about differing views. But so all Bhagavan is saying here, this is the best option. This is the option he recommends that for us to take that view. But it's one that is being seen as many. So what actually exists is only one, but that one is seen as many. So who sees it as many? That is ego. So, but what he says in the final sentence, the picture of names and forms, that's all this multiplicity, all phenomena. The one who sees, that is ego. The cohesive screen, that is the base on which all this is seen. The pervading light, that is the light of awareness, by which that enables the seer to see all this. All these are he, that one fundamental, who is oneself. So we are the one reality. What we actually are is the one reality. We're seeing ourselves as many. So this theme continues throughout many of the verses of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. For example, in verse 4, he says, if we are a form, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. What he means by a form is something limited and something that is distinct from other things. So the form we experience ourselves to be is the form of this body, which in the next verse he clarifies is not, by body he doesn't mean just the physical form of the body, but the whole package, the physical form of the body, the life, the mind, the intellect, and the will. All these are collectively the form that we experience ourselves to be. So long as we experience ourselves as a form, we perceive the world and God likewise. That is, in waking and dream, we experience ourselves as the form of a body, and consequently we see all this multiplicity. In sleep, we don't experience ourselves as the body, therefore we don't experience any multiplicity. And then in the next sentence he says, if oneself is not a form, who can see their forms, and who can see their forms? How? That means how to see their forms. So the clear implication here, it's only when we mistake ourselves to be a form, but we see all this multiplicity of forms. So but what mistakes itself to be a form is ourself as ego. So as soon as we rise as ego, we identify ourselves as I am this body, and consequently we see all this multitude of forms. But if we don't rise as a form, we won't be able to see all these forms. So these forms are just an appearance; they're not real. If they were real, we would see them even when we don't rise as a form. But since they appear only when we rise as a form, that means they're not real. They're dependent. The appearance of this multiplicity of forms is dependent on our mistaking ourselves as a form. And then in the next sentence, he says, this sentence is a sentence that is often translated superficially, because if we take just the simple meaning of the words, Kannalal Kakshiondo, we can take that to mean, is there anything seen without an eye? But the meaning Bhagavan intended here is much deeper than that, and he himself clarified here. Here, alal means other, it implies otherwise than. So can the seen be otherwise than the eye? The eye means referring to that is the Tamil word is kan, the organ of sight, not the first person pronoun, but the EYE eye. What he implies here is the nature of what is seen will not be otherwise than the nature of the eye that sees it. So if the eye that sees it, eye is here a metaphor for awareness. So if the awareness that sees mistakes itself to be a form, then only will it see forms. That awareness experiences itself as the formless fundamental reality that it actually is, it will not see any forms. In other words, it will see only itself. There'll be no multiplicity, no otherness. There'll be just pure awareness, which is pure awareness means awareness that is not aware of anything other than itself. And then he ends this verse by saying, the eye is oneself. Again, eye here is referring to the organ of sight, but it's a metaphor for awareness, EYE. So the eye is oneself, the infinite eye. When he says infinite eye, antamila kan, what he implies is formless, because every form is finite. Every forms are defined by their limitations. So anything that is in any way distinct from any other thing is a form, and it is therefore finite. But the infinite eye has no form, because it's got no limitation. So it's in no way distinct from anything else. And that he implies is the real eye. The real, that's a real awareness. So here, again, it's a thing that what actually exists is only one, but when we, that one, mistake ourselves to be a form of a body, we see ourselves as all this multiplicity. And then in verse 5, he clarifies what he means by, when he talks about body, he's not referring just to the physical form of the body. So he begins by saying, Uḍḍal Panchakosa Uru. The body is a form of Panchakosha. Panchakosha means 5 sheaves. Those 5 are the physical form of the body, called Annamaya Kosha, the life, which is called Pranamaya Kosha, the mind, meaning the grosser functions of the mind, which are called Manomaya Kosha, the intellect, which is a subtler function of the mind, and which is called Vijnanamaya Kosha, and subtlest of all among these koshas is the will, which is called Chittam or Anandamaya Kosha. So these 5 together make up the body that we now mistake ourselves to be. So he said the body is a form of 5 sheaths. Therefore, all 5 are included in the term body. That is, whenever we experience ourselves as I am this body, all these 5 we're experiencing all these 5 because we never experience a dead body as I. So the life, whatever body we experience as I is always a living body. So the life is included. And we never experience a sleeping body as I. It's only a body that is awake. So in the state of waking, the mind, intellect, and will are all functioning within the body. So whenever we experience ourselves as I in this body, we're experiencing all these 5 sheaths as ourself. And then he then asked 2 rhetorical questions. Without a body, is there a world? leaving the body, though he uses the word vitu, which literally means leaving, it implies again without. Without the body, is there anyone who has seen a world? So superficially, these two questions seem to be very similar, but there's a significant difference between them. That is, Bhagavan is covering all ways of, that is, he's preventing us from misunderstanding. Because if you were to say, without a body, is there anyone who has seen a world? We could then come to the conclusion that no, without a body we don't see a world, but the world still exists. So when he says without a body is anyone who has seen the world, he's talking about this is from an epistemological point of view. That is, he's talking about what we know, what we're aware of. So without a body, we are never aware of the world. But not only are we not aware of the world, he also implies in the first sentence, without a body is there a world? He implies that the world doesn't actually exist when we don't experience ourselves as a body. As he said in the previous verse, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. If oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? So all this multitude of forms, a multitude of phenomena that constitute the world appear only when coming to existence or coming to semi-existence only when we rise as ego and therefore identify ourselves as a body. So the first sentence, without a body is there a world, that's talking about the existence. So that's an ontological statement in the form of a rhetorical question. The second one is an epistemological statement, again in the form of a rhetorical question. So the implication is, but without the body, not only do we not see any world, there is no world to be seen at all. So again, he's emphasizing, I mean, these are all connected with this, these all implying what I summarized in this sixth point, namely, everything other than our own being, I am, is just an illusory appearance that seems to exist only in the view of ourself as ego. So all such things seem to exist only when we rise and stand as ego, and hence none of them exist at all when we do not rise as ego. So in the next verse 6, in verse 5 he talked about the body, in verse 6 he talks about the mind. What he says in verse 6 is, the world is a form of the 5 sense impressions, not anything else. That is, what we call a world is just the 5 kinds of sensory input, the sights, the sounds, the taste, the smells, and the tactile sensations. These all together form a picture of a world. But the world is actually nothing but these 5 kinds of sense impressions. So this clearly implies that the world has no independent existence. It is not anything else but these 5 kinds of sense impressions. And he then goes on to say, those 5 sense impressions are impressions to the 5 sense organs. Since the mind alone perceives the world, Manamandru can be taken as the mind alone or the one mind, perceives the world by way of the 5 sense organs. Is there a world besides the mind? That is, he starts by talking about sense impressions, but sense impressions actually are mental impressions. Sight, sounds, tastes, and so on, these are all mental impressions. So ultimately, the world is mental. It is nothing but, it consists of nothing but mind. It's just a series of mental impressions. So is there a world besides the mind? Again, he often asks rhetorical questions. The answer to the rhetorical question is clear. I mean, the implication of a rhetorical question is clear, not answer, implication. That is, he's saying here, there's no world besides the mind. What we call the world is nothing but a series of mental impressions. And the mind that perceives these as one. Then in the next verse he says, he uses the word arivu here. Arivu means awareness, but in this context he's using arivu to refer to the mind, because the mind or ego is the awareness that sees the world. So he says, so he's not here talking about the pure awareness, he's talking about the awareness that is aware of the world, namely the mind or ego. So what he says in this verse is, though the world and awareness arise and subside simultaneously, the world shines by awareness. In other words, it's only in the view of the mind that the world seems to exist. As soon as the mind arises, the world also arises, the world also appears. But it appears only in the view of the mind, so it shines only by the mind. That is, shines here implies that it is made known only by the mind. The mind alone is the awareness that makes this world known, and therefore makes it seem to exist. But since the mind and the world both arise and subside, neither of them are real. Whatever appears and disappears is just a temporary appearance. So whatever exists at one, as Bhagavan often used to say, whatever exists at one time and not at another time doesn't actually exist, even when it seems to exist. So anything that comes into existence and goes out of existence, appears and disappears, arises and subsides, is not real. It derives its semi-existence from something else. So the world derives its semi-existence from the mind or ego, in whose view alone it exists, and ego derives its semi-existence from the underlying reality, which is what he talks about in the next sentence. Only what he says in the next sentence is, only that which shines without appearing or disappearing, as the place for the appearing and disappearing of the world and awareness, is the substance, which is the whole. The substance here means the real substance, the underlying reality. So what exists must always exist. So it must shine without appearing and disappearing. So what is it that shines without appearing and disappearing? The mind, the world, everything appears and disappears. What is the one thing that which shines without ever appearing or disappearing? That is the fundamental awareness I am. Because this awareness I am shines throughout all the three states. In waking, we're aware I am. In dream, we're aware I am. In sleep, we're aware I am. But whereas in sleep, we're aware of nothing other than I am, we're aware of nothing other than our being, in waking and dream, we're aware of ourselves not just as I am, but as I am this body, and consequently we're aware of so many other things. So the fundamental reality, the substance, the whole, that implies the infinite whole, is what never appears or disappears, which shines eternally. That is the awareness I am. That is the being awareness, Satchit. So that is the fundamental reality, is what he's saying here. This is the fundamental reality that he referred to in the first verse as the one fundamental. Then I'll skip over the next verse. It's not so relevant here. Verse 9 is also relevant here. What he says in verse 9, he talks about what we generally translate as dyads and triads, but these words have these are referring to very technical words. Dyad here is a translation of, in Tamil, irritegal, and in Sanskrit, dvandvas. That means pairs of opposites. Pairs of opposites means things like existence and non-existence, life and death, awareness and non-awareness, knowledge and ignorance, happiness and unhappiness, good and bad, liberation and bondage, and so on. All these pairs of opposites. So those are what is meant here by dyads. And triads is in Sanskrit called Triputi, in Tamil called Mupudi. That is, these are the three factors of transitive knowledge or awareness, namely the knower or subject, the thing that is known, and the means by which it is known. So if we see something, if we see a PC in front of us, we who see are the knower or seer. What is known is the PC, that is the object. So we've got the subject and the object. And there's a means by which we know this object. How do we know it? We know it by seeing it. So there are so many different ways. We know things by seeing, by hearing, by tasting, by touching, and by smelling. But these our knowledge is not limited to these. We know so many things by testimony. We've heard, we've read it in the newspaper, or we've read it online, we've learnt it in the history books, or we've learnt it in the science lessons. So these many things we know about, we know through testimony. Many things we know through inference. We infer certain things, but we don't know them directly, but from other things that we know, we can make inferences. So there's so many means of knowledge. But these three, the knower, the means of knowing, and the thing that is known, this is called the Triputi or triad. So when the words translated dyads and triads, they both have a very specific meaning. Dyads is pairs of opposite, triads is these three factors, the subject, object, and means of knowing, the means by which the subject knows the object. So dyads and triads exist holding one thing. Here what he means by holding is depending on. So what is the one thing that they depend on? He doesn't specify it here, but he clarified that what he means by that one thing is ego. Because it's only in the view of ego that dyads and triads seem to exist. So without ego, there are no dyads and triads. In sleep, we don't rise as ego, and therefore we experience no dyads and triads. It's only from the perspective of ego in waking and dream that dyads and triads seem to exist. So that is the one, what he refers to here is one thing. If one sees within the mind what that one thing is, they will slip off. That means the dyads and triads will slip off. Why does he say that? This is the first time he alludes to this, but this is another fundamental principle in throughout Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, that the nature of ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by attending to other things, but to subside and disappear, dissolve back into its source by seeing itself. That is, we seem to be ego only so long as we're aware of things other than ourselves. But when we try to be aware of ourselves, we try to look at ourselves, attend to ourselves, this ego disappears because it has no reality. So if one sees within the mind what that one thing is, means if we look within to see who am I, to see who is this ego, who is knowing all these dyads and triads, this ego will subside and the dyads and triads will disappear along with it. That is what he means by they will slip off. And then he says, only those who have seen, have seen the reality. That means only those who have seen the non-existence of ego and all these dyads and triads are those who have seen the reality. They will not be confused. That all confusion arises confusion arises along with ego, because as soon as we rise as ego, we see all this multiplicity and we get confused. We take all of this multiplicity to be real when none of it is actually real. So that confusion will be ended only when we investigate within the mind what that one thing is. Verses 10 to 13 are also related to this, but they require deeper explanation, so I won't touch on them now. But verse 14, he summarizes all of this. What he says in verse 14, this is a very important verse. Here he's talking about first person, second person, and third person. But he's not talking about grammar. He's using these grammatical terms in a metaphysical sense. That is, the first person is I, the knower. The second and third persons are all the objects, things known. In Tamil, the word for second person is munile. Munile literally means what stands in front. So what is immediately known by us, what is immediately perceptible, that is the second person. Padakai means what spreads out. That's all the things that we don't know directly, but we believe. Like now we are seeing only a tiny portion of this world, but we believe there's a vast world out there. So the world we are not directly perceiving now, that is the third person. What we're directly perceiving, that is the second person. So second and third person collectively is everything other than ourselves. The first person is ego. So what he says here is, if the first person exists, second and third persons will exist. That is, if we rise as ego, we'll see all this multiplicity, is the implication. But then the next sentence is a very important one. He says, if one self-investigating the reality of the first person ceases to exist, second and third persons coming to an end, the nature that shines as one alone is oneself, the state of oneself. This is all, it's quite a lot to take in, but when he says, if one self-investigating the reality of the first person, that there's no by there, but it implies by. So if by one self-investigating the reality of the first person ceases to exist. So here again, he's pointing out this very important principle that we seem to be ego only so long as we do not investigate ourselves. So long as we're looking at other things, we seem to be ego. But if we look back at ourselves, there's no such thing as ego to be seen. So if we investigate the reality of the first person will thereby cease to exist. And when first person ceases to exist, second and third persons will also cease to exist. They come to an end. But when he says investigating the reality of the first person is ego. That is, the ego is the adjunct conflated awareness, I am this body. And in the Kali Vemba version, he actually specifies that very clearly. He says, Uḍڵļadu Nāṛpadu at-tanmai. That first person, I am this body. So he's clearly referring to ego. So, the first person or ego is the false awareness, I am this body. The reality of that is the pure awareness, I am. That is, without being aware I am, we couldn't be aware I am this body. Whether we're aware I am this body or not, we're always aware I am. So that is the reality of the first person. That is what we are to investigate. When we investigate that, the first person will cease to exist. Second and third person will therefore also cease to exist. And the nature that shines as one alone is oneself, the state of oneself. The nature that shines as one means the reality that shines as one alone is oneself. That is what we actually are. The state of oneself, tan nile me, it means the self state, the state of oneself, or it can also be taken here to mean nature. It's what we actually are. It's our real nature. What we actually are is that reality that remains as one when all this multiplicity ceases to exist. And since the multiplicity exists only in the view of ego, the multiplicity will cease to exist only when ego ceases to exist. And what then remains is one. So again, here he's emphasizing that what actually exists is only one. 15 and 16 are also related to this, but not so directly related to this. So I think we can skip 15, 16, 17, 18. These are also important, but verses, but we need not talk about them now. 19 is important. 20 is more 20, 21, 22. These are all about seeing God, because he talked a lot about seeing the world, then he also talks about seeing God. But he's all emphasizing the same thing. But we can truly see, since God is the reality of ourselves, we can see God only by being God. So by ceasing to rise as ego. That's why he says in verse at the end of verse 21, Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, becoming food is seeing. That means only when we are swallowed entirely by God. In other words, only when we subside and merge back into our being and remain as our being, which is what God actually is, will we know God. We can know him only by being him, not by, we can't know him as an object, as something other than ourselves. So these are all relevant, but not so directly relevant. Their relevance takes a little bit more explanation. So then we come to verse 23. This is again, this is where from 23 onwards, he's really talking about ego more specifically. What he says in verse 23, the body does not say I. When he said the body does not say I, he means the body is not aware of itself as I. Why is it not aware of itself as I? Because it's not aware at all. It's devoid of awareness. What is aware of I am this body is not the body, but ego, which mistakes itself to be the body. And here body refers to all the five sheaths, as he had clarified in verse 5. So the body does not say I. No one says, in sleep I do not exist. That is, in sleep there's no body. But we do not, no one doubts no one thinks, no one believes they cease to exist in sleep. Yes, I was sleeping. I don't know anything in sleep, but I was sleeping. We know that. So we know our being in sleep, though we don't know anything else because there's nothing else to know there. And then he says in the next sentence, after one thing I rises, everything rises. So the one thing I rises is ego. Everything that rises means all phenomena. So all these phenomena, the whole, everything other than ourselves appears to exist only when we rise as ego. And then he says, contemplate by a subtle mind where this I rises. And in the Kali Vemba version, he extended this. When one contemplates by a subtle mind where this I rises, it slips off. Or yeah, it slips off, I think is what he says, if I remember correctly. So that's verse 23. Verse 24, he continues on the same theme, but here he very clearly, he clarifies what is ego and what is its relation to the body and to Satchit. That is, he says in this verse, the insentient body does not say I. Again, this is what he said in the previous sentence, but he adds here, he explains why the body does not say I, because it's insentient. So, because it has no awareness of its own, it is not aware of itself as I. What is aware, I am the body, is only ego. So the body itself is not at all aware, therefore it's not aware I. What is aware I is being awareness, but being awareness does not rise. So in the second sentence he says, Satchit Uڵḷadu, Satchit does not rise. Sat means being, aware, chit means awareness, so Satchit is being awareness. That is just the fundamental awareness I am. That is what is referred to here as Satchit. So body isn't aware of itself as I, and Satchit doesn't rise. But in between these two, one thing, I, rises as the extent of a body. So when he says since it rises, it's not Sat-Chit. And since it is aware of itself as I, it's not the body. So it's neither the body nor Sat-Chit. That's what he means by saying in between. It's the in between has two important implications here. The only connection between the reality, Sat-Chit, and the appearance of the body is this ego, because it's only in the view of ego that the body seems to exist. And only ego has a direct connection with Sat-Chit, because Sat-Chit is the fundamental awareness I am, whereas ego is the adjunct conflated awareness I am this body. That's why he says in between, because it's the link between Sat-Chit and the body, and hence all phenomena. That's one meaning of in between, or one implication of in between. Another implication of in between is if you read about some news story, you see it on the television, or read about it on the internet, or in a newspaper or something, you may have a doubt whether that story is entirely true. So you may ask a friend, is this story really true, or is it just a fabrication? Is it just made up? And your friend may say to you, it's neither true nor false. It's somewhere in between. There in between means it's got elements of truth in it, it's got elements of falsehood. So it's not entirely true, it's not entirely false, it's somewhere in between. So it also has this implication. Ego is neither entirely false, it's not the body, which is entirely unreal, nor is it entirely Sat-Chit, which is what is real. So it's neither entirely real nor entirely false. It's a mixture of what is true and what is false. What is true is I am, what is false is the body. So that's another implication of in between. And he says this thing, it rises as the extent of a body. As the extent of a body means limited to the extent of a body. When we rise as ego, we feel this body is I, so I am here, not there. We feel limited in space, we occupy a small area in space, and we feel limited in time. This body was born a few years ago, and a few years hence it's going to die. So we are limited in time and limited in space. We're also limited in what is called vastu. We are this thing, not that thing. Because I'm this body, I'm not this PC, I'm not this table, I'm not these things. So all these limitations we impose upon ourselves by rising as ego. Because as soon as we rise as ego, we project a body and mistake that body to be I. So then he goes on to say, what is this one I that rises as the extent of a body? He says it's Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. That means it's the not that binds, not is granti, but binds awareness, chit, to what is not aware, jada, namely the body. So it's not pure awareness, but it's awareness mixed and conflated with adjunct, which is jada. And that's what binds it. It's entangled, we can say. Chit seems to be entangled with the body. Of course, chit itself is never entangled, but chit in the form of ego is entangled. So that is why it's called Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. Bandham. Bandham means bondage. That is, so long as we limit ourselves as this body, we are thereby bound. It is jivan. Jiva means the soul. It is nupame, the subtle body. It is ahande, ego. It is samsara, ichamsara, he says, this samsara. Samsara means, basically samsara means embodied existence. So long as we rise as ego, take ourselves to be in this body, we're caught up in samsara, we're caught up in all the limitations and all the problems and suffering and pleasures and pains that are involved in this. So this is samsara. and it is mind. Here he uses mind in the sense, the term mind can often be used to refer to other thoughts, but here he's referring to mind as the knower of all other thoughts. So it's the mind in the sense of ego. So it's all these things. So this is the nature of ego. And then in the next verse, very important, he describes, here he really describes what is the nature of ego. That is, in the last line, he describes ego as uruvatra peya ahande. Uruvatra means formless, devoid of form, because ego has no form of its own. And pay means a demon. It's all problems are created by this ego. So this is the ultimate demon. This is there's no devil or Satan or no asura or rakshasa or any other type of demon you can think of worse than this ego. This ego is the ultimate demon because it's what creates all this problem. It's formless because it has no form of its own, as I said. But having no form of its own means it's got no separate existence of its own. So in its essential nature, ego has no separate existence. It is essentially just awareness, be it just such it. Only when it grasps the form of a body as I, does it have a seeming separate existence. And that's when the demonic nature of ego comes out. So that's how he describes ego in the last line. But he begins the verse talking about the nature of ego without specifying ego, but it's clearly implied there. He says in the first sentence, urupatri undam, grasping form, it comes into existence. That doesn't mean by grasping form. What it means is as soon as ego comes into existence, it grasps the form. No forms exist independent of ego, so the implication is that as soon as we rise as ego, we project the form of a body and take that body to be I. So that's what he means by grasping form, it comes into existence. Urupatri nikum, grasping form, it stands. Stands here implies endures. That is, we cannot rise as ego, we cannot come into existence as ego without simultaneously grasping a form, and we can't endure, we can't stand for a moment as ego without constantly grasping a form. So the form we grasp when we come into existence, and form we constantly are grasping throughout the waking and dream states, is the form of a body. But we don't stop with just grasping the form of a body as I. Having grasped the form of a body as I, we then project we project this world, and our mind is constantly going outwards, experiencing perceptions, sights, sounds, tastes, smells, tactile sensations, and so many thoughts in the mind about these, so many emotions, so many feelings, so many and then we use our judgment, the intellect works, and then the will works. I like this, I don't like that, I want this, I don't want that. All these arises only after we rise as ego. So having risen as ego, we're then constantly grasping form. Right? That is, we're constantly being aware of things other than ourselves. Because ego is a formless phantom. It's not grasping by hands and arms or feet or legs or anything. It's grasping in its awareness. So urupatri implies being aware of forms. Grasping form, he says, urupatri undu mika ongam. Grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. So ego is nourished by constantly attending to things other than itself, is the implication. Uruvittu urupatram. Leaving form, it grasps form. That is because it cannot stand for a moment without grasping form. If it leaves one form, it will grasp another form. That can be understood in two senses. Throughout the waking and dream state, we are constantly jumping from one perception to another, one experience to another. So there's a constant flow of phenomena going through our awareness, as it were. And also, when we leave the body, we grasp another body. So, for example, when we leave a body in dream, we come to this waking state, or we come to some other dream and grasp another body as I. If we don't grasp any body, we subside in sleep. But then again, from sleep we rise again and again grasp a form. So the implication is ego cannot rise, stand, or flourish without constantly grasping form. And grasping form means being aware of things, being aware of form. Since ego is a formless demon, it has no form of its own. So whatever forms it grasps are things other than itself. So being aware of objects or phenomena is what is meant by grasping form. So if instead of constantly grasping form, what happens if ego tries to grasp itself? If it tries to know, if it turns its attention away from all form back towards itself, what happens? That's what he points out in the next sentence. Tedinal autem pidicum. That literally means if seeking, it takes flight. If what seeks what? That implies if ego seeks itself, or if it seeks its own reality, if it seeks to know who am I, it will autem pidicum. Autem means running, pidicum means grasping. So it's an idiom very similar to the English idiom taking flight. Taking flight means running away. So ego, the implication is that if we investigate ego, if we turn our attention back to see who am I, this ego will subside and eventually dissolve back into its source. So from this verse, he reveals that the nature of ego is that ego cannot rise, stand, or flourish without grasping form. So ego is constantly grasping form. But if instead of grasping form, if ego tries to grasp itself, if it tries to investigate who am I, it will thereby subside and dissolve back into its source. So ego rises, stands, and flourishes by attending to things other than itself, but it subsides by attending to itself. This is, as far as I'm aware, in no scripture or philosophical text before Bhagavan has this been stated so clearly. But the nature of ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by grasping things other than itself, but to subside by grasping or investigating itself. This is why self-investigation is the only way to surrender this ego. Because so long as we're attending to anything other than ourselves, we are feeding and sustaining ego, we're nourishing ego. Only by grasping ourselves can we put an end to the rising of ego. So after seeing this verse, people may wrongly jump to the conclusion that forms exist independent of ego. But as soon as ego comes into existence, it grasps a pre-existing form. But that is not what is meant. That is clarified in the next verse 26, in which he says, Ahande undayan anatum undahum. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Everything here means all forms, all objects, all phenomena. So, since all, whether we call them forms, objects, phenomena, vishayas, whatever we call it, they all exist only in the view of ego. So they have no existence independent of ego. So only when ego comes into existence do all these phenomena come into existence. So if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Hande indrail indranatum. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. That is, there are no phenomena in the absence of ego. Phenomena are just appearances in the view of ego. Then in the next sentence he says, Ahandeye yavamam. Ego itself is everything. That is, when we rise as ego and see all this multiplicity, we are seeing ourselves as all this multiplicity. Just like in dream, but everything we see in a dream, we are seeing ourselves as all those things. There's no dream world out there. It's not existing independent of our mind. It exists only in the view of the dreaming mind. So it has, the dream world is nothing but the dreaming mind. The dreaming mind sees itself as the dream world. Likewise, in the waking state, we as ego see ourselves as all this multiplicity. So everything ultimately is ego. In the Upanishads, it said all of this is Brahman. So here Bhagavan says all of this is only ego. Is there a contradiction here? No, because that is Bhagavan is supplying here a missing link. That is, all this is Brahman in the sense that all this is nothing but ego. And if ego investigates itself, it will find itself to be Brahman. So everything is ultimately just Brahman. But so long as we rise as ego, that everything seems to exist only so long as we rise as ego. So it's ego that sees itself as all this multiplicity. When ego sees itself as it actually is, it will see it as Brahman. So ultimately, ego and all this is ultimately nothing but Brahman. So ego itself is everything. Then he concludes this verse by saying, Adalal yadu idu nadale ovadal yavamena or. Therefore, know that investigating what this is giving up everything. Why is investigating what this is giving up everything? Investigating what this is means investigating what ego is. And what happens when we investigate ego, what it is? It, as he said in the previous verse, it takes flight. It subsides and disappears. So ego seems to exist only so long as we're attending to other things. If we look at ego itself to see what is this ego, there's no such thing to be found, because all ego actually is just pure awareness. Just like if you see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, the snake seems to be a snake only so long as you don't look at it carefully enough. If you look at the snake very carefully, what do you see? You see, oh, it's not a snake, it's just a rope. What was seeming to be a snake all this time was actually never a snake. It was always just a rope. Likewise, what now seems to be ego is nothing but pure awareness, nothing but Brahman itself. But it seems to be something separate so long as it's seeing other things. If it turns to look at itself, if it looks at itself keenly enough, it will see itself as it actually is, which is Satchit, pure being awareness. So if we investigate what this ego is, ego will cease to exist, and without ego, nothing else exists. So that is why he says, investigating what this is alone is giving up everything. So if we want to become a renunciate, we don't have to change the color of our cloth, we don't have to wear orange cloth, we don't have to shave our hair, we don't have to grow a long beard or anything. All we have to do is to investigate who am I, and thereby we will give up everything if we investigate ourselves deeply enough, keenly enough. There are many other verses I could talk about, but I think that is sufficient for today. But the central point is all of these are implying that everything other than our own being I am is just an illusory appearance that seems to exist only in the view of ourself as ego. So all such things seem to exist only when we rise and stand as ego, and hence none of them exist at all when we do not rise as ego.
Thank you so much for this explanation, Michael. I made several notes and I wrote down some questions, but I see I'll keep some for when we have the meeting about the next key point.
All right.
But I do want to say and ask some things. Let me get just also to organize my thoughts. So we are currently experiencing an illusory world and illusory body, taking ourselves to be this person. As Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu starts, because we
Yeah.
see or experience the world.
Yes.
I'm aware of that where you are on the spiritual path, there are different levels of understanding the teaching of Bhagavan. So if you allow me, I want to point out just a couple of things that are in the book, but also in Guru Vachaka Kufai that I was currently studying, and then I will ask a question about it. So I referenced in the book, but it's actually in Maharshi's Gospel, and perhaps even in talks, Bhagavan says, there is no alternative for you but to accept the world as unreal. If you are seeking the truth and the truth alone, for the simple reason that unless you give up the idea that the world is real, your mind will always be after it. If you take the appearance to be real, you will never know the real itself, although it is the real alone that exists. So that is, I guess, for quite a lot of people already a pretty radical position, of course, to take the world as unreal. But I was also, the last couple of days, again starting to study some things in GVK, Guru Vachaka Kufai, and let me see, it really deeply touched me, resonated with me. So there's one verse, let me quickly look it up, that says, it's verse 889. Oh no, it's another one. It's 890. Accept the non-dual whole, self between brackets, all the mundane multiplicities imposed on it as this or that are not real even in the least. They are all nothing but a complete illusion superimposed on it. Such alone is the final verdict of all yanis between brackets. So I think this beautifully relates to the key point we were talking about now. But what I also really loved was the verse before that. No, that was verse 888. That Brahman is the whole, Purnam. By the way, reading from your version with Sadhu Om, the world appearance is also the whole, even when this whole merges into that whole. It is the whole. Even when this whole goes out as if a separate reality from that whole, the whole alone remains. For me, that's like going deeper in the truth, or the deeper even. And I really, really loved the and I kind of want to read it given context also to what we're talking about today. The explanation I guess you gave with that this verse is adapted from the famous Vedic stanza Purnamada Purnamidam, which was sometimes quoted by Bhagavan. In some commentaries upon Sri Bhagavan's teachings, this Vedic stanza is wrongly interpreted to support the view that it is both false and futile to affirm that Brahman alone is real and that the world of names and forms is unreal. However, when this stanza says that is whole and this is whole, it should not be taken to mean that Brahman is real and that the world as such is also real. Sri Bhagavan's teaching is that the whole world is unreal as world, but real as Brahman, the whole Purnam, just as a snake is unreal as a snake, but real as the rope, its base. And then I really liked what you did with, therefore this verse should be understood in the following light, that the rope is the rope. This, the seeming snake, is also the rope. Even when this snake merges, disappears into that rope, it is the rope. Even when this snake goes out, as if a snake, from that rope, the rope alone remains. So in other words, just as in truth the rope alone exists, so in truth Brahman, the whole, alone exists. And just as the seeming snake has a false appearance, so the seeming world is a false appearance. Neither the going out manifestation of this world appearance nor its merging again into Brahman is real. Brahman ever remains as the immutable and unchanging whole. So what I had to think about that a lot. I was always a bit puzzled by the jada aspect, which makes sense, of course, if you're, I guess, start following this path. But am I correct in that way to say it's insentient if you see it as name and form, so that's duality. But but it's real in the sense that it is nothing other than ourself. So it's nothing other than whole or whole. Is that correct, for example, if I say it like that?
That is, all objects or phenomena, all phenomena are
Yeah,
objects of awareness.
yeah,
So objects are not aware,
yeah,
but they don't exist independent of awareness because they appear only in awareness.
yeah,
So jada means what is not itself aware.
yeah,
But it doesn't mean that it has any existence independent of awareness. That
yeah,
is, all jada, all phenomena of jada, they exist only in the view of ego. Ego is not pure awareness, but it's not jada. It's a mixture of that is it.
yeah,
It is chit jada granti. It is chit mistaking itself to be jada. But of course, chit itself, chit as it is, never mistakes itself to be anything. So ego is as ego, it's unreal. As chit, it is real.
yeah,
So that is when in verse 7 that I talked about, when Bhagavan talks about though the world and awareness rise and subside simultaneously, the world shines by awareness. The awareness he's talking about there is not the pure awareness, but that adjunct conflated awareness called ego.
yeah, yeah. And I guess, and I was one of them, though I don't think that it's nowadays that much the case, but that a lot of people see ego still as kind of an entity, but in essence, it's nothing than a confusion, a false idea, or what Bhagavan told
Yes,
first. I thought, of course, yeah,
yes, but it's um, many people read that Bhagavan has said ego is unreal. So they say, oh, Bhagavan said ego is unreal, so we don't have to bother about ego. That is completely missing the point.
yeah,
That is, the very fact that we perceive the world means we already have risen as ego, because it's only in the view of ego that the world exists. So we we are fooling ourselves if we tell ourselves ego doesn't exist, but still believe the world to be real, or still believe the world has some independent existence. It has no existence independent of ego. So ultimately, ego is unreal. But so long as we experience all this multiplicity, ego has a semi-existence. And everything else that seems to exist depends on ego for its semi-existence. That is, all phenomena derive their semi-existence from ego because they seem to exist only in the view of ego. Ego doesn't actually exist because even ego appears and disappears. Whatever appears and disappears is not real, but real means what actually exists. So if something actually exists, it must always exist. If it comes into existence and goes out of existence, it is not actually existence. It's borrowing its existence from something else, something other than itself. So all phenomena borrow their semi-existence from the semi-existence of ourself as ego. And ego borrows its semi-existence from the real existence of ourself as we actually are.
yeah, yeah. Thank you for that, Michael.
Right.
Sean, is there a follow-up question you would like to ask about this?
The only thought I had was sometimes we talk in terms of destruction of the ego, but in fact, it doesn't even exist at all in the final analysis. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah, it's when we talk about destruction of ego, we're talking from the perspective of ego. That is, so long as we seem to be ego, we have to seek its destruction. But since it doesn't actually exist, we can't destroy it by any means other than seeing that it never existed in the first place. But Bhagavan often talks about destruction of ego. In the final verse of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, he talks about what is liberation. People have so many everyone that is in the dharmic religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, everyone knows that the ultimate goal is liberation, moksha. But there are so many different ideas about what is moksha. For some people, if you go to Kailasha to live with Shiva, or go to Vaikuntha to live with Vishnu, or go to Goloka to live with Krishna, that is liberation. So there's so many different ideas. So Bhagavan says, if it is said that liberation is with form, without form, or without form, I will say liberation is only the destruction of ego that distinguishes with form, without form, or without form. So destruction of ego is our aim, but we need to understand that it's not that ego actually exists and we have to destroy it. Since ego doesn't actually exist, even when it seems to exist, it can be destroyed only by seeing that it doesn't actually exist. And even to say seeing that it doesn't actually exist, even that is not putting it quite perfectly, because who is to see that ego doesn't exist? Obviously, ego cannot see that ego doesn't exist. And in the view of pure awareness, there never was ego in the first place. So to talk about the non-existence of ego is meaningless from the perspective of pure awareness. So what is meant is seeing ourselves as we actually are. When we see ourselves as we actually are, we know that we alone exist. And therefore nothing else exists. So there's no ego or world or anything. But when we're using language, we're always talking in terms of our limited mental concepts. But actually that state is not even seeing that ego doesn't exist. If we look carefully at the illusory rope, illusory snake, we'll see it's a snake. Sorry, we'll see it's a rope, and we'll therefore conclude it was never a snake. But in the case of seeing ourselves as we actually are, there'll be no one remaining there to see that once it was a rope, once it seemed to exist, and now it doesn't seem to exist. Because in the view of what we actually are, as pure Sat-Chit, there never was any ego in the first place. So words will always have their limitation. There's no way to express this perfectly in words. The only perfect expression of Bhagavan's teachings, as he himself often reminded us, the only perfect expression is silence. And silence means not just vocal silence, not just mental silence, the eternal silence of pure being. That is what we actually are. And that alone can reveal what we actually are.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Michael. So is it okay for everyone if we go to the questions?
Yes.
So under the announcement video of this meeting, I'm going to ask the questions that are mentioned there, and I'm just starting with, I do that chronologically, the one that was asked first. So the first question is there any point in knowing about anything else other than I? Would engaging in anything other than this endeavor be considered as wasting my life? I love this question. Yeah.
Yes. Ultimately, yes. There's in Atma-vichara, wait a second, in verse 3, Bhagavan says, very, very beautifully, Tanne aridal andri, pinne edu arihil ein. That means without knowing oneself, if one knows whatever else, what? What means so what? I mean, what is the value of knowing everything without knowing oneself? And then in the next sentence he says, Tane arindidil pin enne ulladu arya. If one has known oneself, then what exists to know? That is, everything else seems to exist only because we don't know what we actually are. When we know ourselves as we actually are, we alone exist. So there's nothing else worth knowing other than knowing oneself. But so long as we rise as ego, we don't yet know ourselves. So we are trying to wean our mind off its addiction to knowing other things. So as part of that process of weaning our mind off, obviously knowing Bhagavan's teachings, clearly understanding Bhagavan's teachings and putting them into practice, without a clear understanding of what Bhagavan's teachings are about, we won't be able to put them into practice, and we won't be able to know what we actually are. So some knowledge other than the fundamental knowledge I am has some use. So like Bhagavan said, if you get a thorn stuck in your foot, you use another thorn to remove it. So some knowledge is necessary to remove this false knowledge. So we can't say, if we could remain absorbed in self-attentiveness without a break, then nothing else is necessary. But so long as we lack sufficient love to attend to ourselves uninterruptedly, then knowing at least a little bit of other things, particularly Bhagavan's teachings, is helpful. In fact, it's very necessary. If we don't understand this spiritual path, if we don't, now it seems to us that we have this body. Unless we understand that this is not what we actually are, what we actually are is just this fundamental awareness I am, when we are asked to investigate ourselves, we'll be investigating something that we suppose ourselves to be, which is not actually what we are. So some knowledge is necessary in order to enable us to do this practice, which alone will remove the false knowledge.
Yes, and perhaps I can add to that for more clarifying, because I heard you say that, and it's also my experience in that way. It's not about only, I mean, it's important to have the intellectual understanding,
Yeah.
but in the end, we need to have the actual experience of that knowledge, because that is where, especially nowadays in the Advaita, things are being represented wrongly in that way. Understanding what you truly are, you are what you actually are. Yeah.
What you call intellectual knowledge is what I prefer to call conceptual knowledge. Because in the intellect is that ability to distinguish one thing from another. So, but we first have to understand at a conceptual level, because without the clear conceptual understanding, we won't be able to put it into practice and gain the much deeper understanding that is derived from practice. And ultimately, this practice will lead to the dissolution of the understander, if you want to call it that, the ego. The one who understands is ego. But in order to put an end to this entity that now seeks to understand, we need to have a certain amount of clear understanding of what we actually are. So this clear understanding begins at a conceptual level. It is deepened to a non-conceptual level by practice, and eventually it leads to the complete dissolution of the one who had this understanding.
Yeah, that's actually it relates beautifully to another part of GVK that I was reading, and it was verse 892. After understanding theoretically through Shravana and Manana that self is non-dual, and after staggering again and again in one's effort to attain through Nididhyasana the practical experience of the real self, when finally and with great dejection all one's mental efforts subside, the knowledge which then shines in the heart is the nature of that reality.
Yes, that's very good.
So yeah, that I read that, and I I also, yeah, that really resonated in me.
Yes.
And just for who is interested, maybe that's nice to state to mention that GVK version, Guru Vachaka Kovai, is freely available on your website, so
Yes,
people can
yes.
download it there and read this and many, many other beautiful verses themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you ready to go to the next
Yes, yes,
question?
yes.
Yeah. So the next question.
Sean is signaling something.
In the last RMFUK, Michael, you said, quote, Advaita without bhakti is just a lifeless philosophy.
Yes, exactly. Bhakti is absolutely essential because however much we may understand all this at a conceptual level, if we have no love to surrender ourselves, we're never going to put it into practice. And if we don't put it into practice, it's useless. So, as Bhagavan said, Bhakti is the mother of jnana. That love is absolutely essential. Because this is, we have to be, as Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, investigating what this ego is giving up everything. So unless we are willing to give up everything, we will not be willing to investigate ourselves deeply enough. So the love is absolutely essential. There are many people who consider themselves to be Advaitins, but for them, Advaita is just a nice philosophy, something they can do whatever they want with it. I mean, argue with others or try and outsmart others by being a smarter Advaitin than the other next person, whatever it is. But that's missing the point. The whole point of Advaita means ekam-eva Advaitiyam, one only without a second. So long as we're experiencing this multiplicity, all our saying that we're Advaitins is not our practical experience. We need to make it our practical experience by being that one only without a second. And we can be that only by ceasing to rise as ego. And for that, that's why Advaita for Advaita, self-surrender is absolutely essential, because without self-surrender, in other words, without annihilation of ego, there can be no experience of Advaita. So people who think that Advaita is somehow different to Bhakti have not understood either Bhakti or Advaita. Advaita is the pinnacle of the path of Bhakti, and Bhakti is the heart of Advaita. The blossoming of Bhakti is Advaita, the heart of Advaita is Bhakti.
You have a follow-up question, Sean, on this?
All ends in silence, one only without a second.
Yeah. Well, I can only point out, if we're talking about love and if I'm walking this path, that there needs to be, I can only speak for myself, of course, such an overwhelming love to not only conceptually understand what Advaita is, but the willingness to actually make it your own direct experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
For that, you absolutely need love or the beauty of the truth. That I have my own language at times.
And nobody succeeds in this path, as Bhagavan made clear, without patient and persistent practice. And that patient and persistent practice requires all-consuming love.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So are we ready for the next question?
Yes.
Yeah. Someone asked, but first says, Michael, love your books and all your work. Thank you deeply and dearly. My questions. Let's see if I have to ask them one by one. How is it possible that some people are able to use imagination to manifest, influencing the dream, although ultimately not true happiness, since the ego sustains outward appearances? Is this merely a case of prarabdha and there is no actual influence in reality? Let me just read everything and then you can see if you want to answer it one by one. And is it normal to notice external desires being fulfilled? The second one doesn't care and focuses only on self. Tips on not getting distracted when this happens. Any thoughts too on Maharshi's comment on parallel realities, although ultimately futile? It's interesting that likely all realms of existence exist within this dream the ego creates. So these are multiple questions. Yeah.
Okay. Can you ask me one by one?
Yeah. So I guess these two are related to each other. How is it possible that some people are able to use imagination to manifest, so influencing the dream, although ultimately not true happiness, since the ego sustains outward appearances? And to add this one,
I'll answer that one first. This sounds to me like siddhis, magical powers, which supposedly people can gain by certain yogic practices. And I think there are also certain types of it is believed that there are certain types of spirits, certain types of entities who can be by certain magical rites or whatever can be conjured up to fulfill the desires and things. But all this is just getting more and more into this delusion because none of this is real in the first place. So why should we have a desire to manifest anything? If we are manifesting anything, we are deluding ourselves. There's one verse that Bhagavan translated from somewhere. The meaning of that verse is the Indrajalikan. The Indrajalikan means the magician in the sense of in a festival or a fair, the street musician, the one who shows wonderful powers, but does it all by trickery. So it's the Indrajalikan deludes the world without deluding himself. That is, he knows all these magic tricks he's doing. It's just magic. I mean, it's just like a magician at a party who comes to entertain, who pulls a rabbit out of a hat or whatever it is. He's not deluding himself. He's deluding other people. But the Siddha deludes not only the world, but deludes himself. That is, the Siddha believes his magic is real. So that's the worst type of delusion. But there are some siddhi, some people pursue the path of yoga or certain tantric paths or whatever just to gain power. Ramakrishna told the story about some sadhu who spent 40 years doing yoga in order to gain the power to walk on water. And finally, one day, when he was able to do it, he walked across the Ganga and he very proudly said to other sadhus, see, now I've this power, I'm able to walk across the Ganga. And the other sadhus just laughed at him and said, we can cross the Ganga just by giving a boatman a quarter anna, a quarter paisa or whatever it is, some small coin. You spent 40 years just for this. In other words, it's a waste of time to try and acquire all these powers. But these may be possible, but so what? In a dream we can fly. Is that a great achievement? Not every dream. One dream we can fly, the next dream if we want to fly, we're not able to do so. So all these are just unreal appearances. If we have any taste in these things, we are deluding ourselves. We are just getting further into this Maya.
in talk number 20 of Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi, he distinguishes between a spiritual aspirant and a seeker of powers or siddhis. Those are distinct things.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The spiritual aspirant is seeking to surrender himself, to give up everything. The seeker of power is seeking to acquire things for himself. So they're complete opposites.
Yeah, perhaps it's also worthwhile to add to this, because this could perhaps also be the reason why this person asked it, and if not, it's still very common nowadays, namely the concept of the law of attraction, what is promoted a lot, that you can attract that you can manifest actually what you focus on mentally. But I think the ultimate manifestation is, of course, self-manifestation.
This is not a new idea. This idea has been around for thousands of years, and there are people who've been trying to do this, and some imagine they succeed. But even if you succeed, you cannot succeed in these things if it's not destined to happen anyway. So you're not actually achieving anything.
Yeah.
There are also some verses in Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu and Abundam where Bhagavan talks about this. Verses, I think, 16, 17. Which ones? I'll just get the... Yeah, 15, 16, and 17. He says in verse 15, not knowing the fact that they move by Shakti, the buffoonery of lunatics who strive thus, we shall acquire all siddhis, is a match for the story of the lame person who said, if anyone helps me rise, what measure are these enemies? In other words, what are these enemies before me? All I need is someone to help me to stand. So the people who seek to acquire powers, siddhis, they themselves depend on that ultimate divine power, and they don't recognize that, but they think that they can acquire all powers for themselves. Bhagavan calls it buffoonery. And in the next verse he says, since Chitta Shanti, that means pacification of mind, or peace of mind, but I think pacification is better in this context. Since pacification of mind alone is liberation, which is accomplished. Here, which is accomplished means which is ever accomplished. So that's our real nature, liberation. But that can be experienced only by pacification of mind. Since that is the case, how will those whose mind is yoked to siddhis, which are not accomplished without activity of the mind, immersed in the bliss of liberation, in which turbulence of the mind has ceased? So seeking siddhis is going in completely the opposite direction to seeking liberation. So greatest folly. In verse 17, he again ridicules such people. When God bears the burden of the world, the spurious soul bearing is a Gopram Tangi form mockery. Gopram Tangi, Gopram is the large temple towers that are built above the gateways of temples. And these Goprams they're many stories high, and at the top there are four figures that are holding the top of the Gopram. They seem to be holding the top, but actually they are supported by the Gopram. They're not really holding anything. They're just mock figures. They were made out of plaster on the top of a Gopram. So he says it's just a mockery, like those Gopram Tangi who seem to be supporting everything, whereas they themselves are being supported by that tower. So God is bearing the whole burden of the world. If we think that we are bearing anything, this world isn't in a good state, so I'm going to acquire all siddhis and rectify this world. It's a mockery, it's according to Bhagavan. And then he gives a well-known analogy, but he first gave in Nana, someone traveling in a train but is carrying a great burden, not putting the luggage on the train, suffering carrying on head is whose fault? So it's a very seeking the spiritual path is the path of complete surrender. Seeking to acquire siddhis is the very opposite of surrender. It's thinking that I should have that power and to use that power, even if we think we are doing it for good. Doesn't God know better than us what is good for this world? So as Bhagavan often used to say to people who wanted to reform or rectify the world, he who has created the world knows how to take care of it. Leave it to him. So we have to just completely surrender ourselves, leave everything to him.
Also in talk number 20, Bhagavan says, which is the real power? Is it to increase prosperity or bring about peace? That which results in peace is the highest perfection, siddhi.
Yes, exactly.
Also, I wanted to mention briefly that when we're on the subject of law of attraction, someone who really helped to popularize that was Rhonda Byrne, and but she did The Secret, but and a lot of people criticized her for that, and a lot of people liked it. But in any case, I just wanted to mention that Michael was also featured in her follow-up book, The Greatest Secret. He was quoted on the first page of chapter 1 from Happiness and the Art of Being.
Yes. Well, whatever. It all has to all this seeking to accomplish anything outside has to subside. And the one who seeks to accomplish, namely ego, has to subside. In this context, it's also worth referring to verse 35 of verse 35 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, in which Bhagavan, here I've translated siddhi as accomplishment. What he says here is being, knowing the substance which exists as accomplished is accomplishment. All other accomplishments are just accomplishments achieved in dream. If one wakes up leaving sleep, are they real? Will those who, standing in the real state, have left unreality be deluded? I could also read the same thing, which is using the word siddhi and siddha. Being, knowing the substance which exists as siddha, that means accomplished, is a siddhi. That's the real accomplishment. All other siddhis are just siddhis achieved in a dream. That is our present waking state is nothing but a dream. So even if we can fly and do all sorts of magic tricks, it's no more real than being able to fly in a dream. So so he goes on to say, if one wakes up, will those who, standing in the real state, have left unreality be deluded? When we wake up from a dream, we're no longer deluded by anything that we experienced in the dream. In the dream we were able to fly. We don't then jump out of a window thinking we can fly in the waking state, because as soon as we wake up, we recognize that was just a dream.
I would like to also mention briefly for those interested that I don't know how many people know this, but The Greatest Secret by Rhonda Byrne, she had people who she quoted. You were quoted several times in that book from Happiness and the Art of Being. And she had people who were quoted, most of the contributors, or the people she quoted rather, contributed audio to it. So there's actually an audio book, and the times that you're quoted, you actually are reading it. So I just wanted to mention that in case no one knew about that.
Yeah.
Oh, you also did an interview with one of the contributors. I can't remember his name at the moment. He does the Sedona method.
Yeah, I can't remember who that was. Yes, I remember.
So I want to say something about the siddhis.
Yeah.
I was also thinking about verse 35, and I always love it when you say, well, whatever you kind of accomplish or gain in this life, you have to let go of it when the body dies.
Yes.
And well, I'm devoted to this path, and to me it seems the ultimate siddhi, it's kind of a synonym for self-attainment, is of
Yeah.
course the siddhi of being the immortal, the eternal self,
Yes, yes, yes.
overcoming the death of the body. I mean,
Yeah.
if we talk about any siddhi, what is powerful, or the eternal happiness that you are, that seems to me the true siddhi, and for
Yeah,
that you
yeah,
have to know or experience who you truly are.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you already touched on it with the follow-up question, because the first question was referring to people using their imagination to manifest. And then the follow-up question was, is this merely a case of prarabdha and there is no actual influence in reality?
Yes, whatever we are given to experience is prarabdha. But so if we achieve siddhis, that is prarabdha. But seeking siddhis is not prarabdha. Seeking siddhis, having the desire for siddhis, that is, if we make effort to achieve those siddhis, that is agamya. And however much we seek to achieve them, if it is not in destiny, we're not going to achieve them. But if we've been seeking them for many lives, then finally we may be given the opportunity in one life to actually uh, achieve those siddhis according to the prarabdha of that life. And then we will see what a worthless attainment it is.
Do I even remember correctly that the fact of even seeking for cities is on the path, well, I'm paraphrasing in my words, is very, very bad and can keep you entangled for many,
Yeah,
many,
yeah,
many, many
yeah,
lifetimes. Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely.
yeah,
Because it's going in, it's running directly in the opposite direction.
yeah. It's kind of inflating ego in that
Yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Is it normal to notice external desires being fulfilled? The second one doesn't care and focuses only on self.
If we focus only on self, we wouldn't even notice if desires are fulfilled. Moreover, if we're really focusing on ourselves, we won't have any desires to be fulfilled. To the extent to which we only to the extent to which we give up the desires will we be able to focus deeply on ourselves. That is, some people, when they talk about surrender, they say, if you surrender everything to God, then you'll find your desires are being fulfilled. That means it's not surrender, because so long as you've got any desires, you're not surrendering to God. So it's yeah, it's not the fulfillment of desires or the very having of desires. It's antithetical to focusing our attention on ourselves. Only to the extent to which the desires have waned will we be able to attend to ourselves. And then we won't be bothered whatever happens, it's all the sweet will of God. If we want all our desires to be fulfilled, there's a very simple method.
Mhm.
Bhagavan reveals it in verse 2 of Arunachalapatikam. Ninishtam enishtam imbedaku. Your will is my will. That is happiness for me. So only if we completely surrender our will so that his will alone becomes our will, then then our will always manifest, because we'll have no will of our own. Because whatever happens is according to the will of God, according to the will of Bhagavan. So if you want to all our desires to be fulfilled, all we have to do is to surrender our will and have no will other than his will. And then we'll find everything will be happen as we want it to happen. That's why he says, Imbedaku, that is happiness for me. Whatever you wish, that is happiness for me. Put me in heaven, put me in hell, doesn't matter to me. So long as it's what you will, it's happiness for me.
Yeah, that's of course the ultimate surrender in that
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
Yeah. Then this person also asks tips on not getting distracted when this happens. So I guess what this is referring to, is it normal to notice external desires being fulfilled? Well, tips on not getting distracted when this happens. Yeah.
Stop looking outwards, look within. That's the only way. Well, all distractions happen when we allow our attention to slip away from ourselves. If we want to overcome distractions, we need to focus our attention more and more on ourselves. But that is not something we're going to achieve overnight. It takes patient and persistent practice. And there's no substitute for practice.
Yeah. Could I also say, if you notice just the moment you get distracted, you can kind of use the distraction to ask yourself to whom? To whom?
Yeah.
Who is the one who is distracted?
Yeah.
Because it's so easy.
Yeah. But it's not just a matter of asking to whom.
Yeah.
It's a matter of, Bhagavan didn't say ask to whom. He said investigate to whom. That means turn your attention back to yourself.
Yeah. In other words, be self-attentive.
Yeah. Turn your attention back to the one to whom all these things appear.
Well, anyone who's actually putting this into practice, I guess, is aware of that. There can also be like an inner critic, like, shoot, I was distracted again, which in itself is, of course, a thought.
Yeah.
It's instead of kind of feeding that story, like being the sinner. It's better to be to turn it inwards and be self-attentive.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm very much aware in doing the practice how much you're kind of fighting against habits, like the mind is habituated to think in certain ways. Yeah.
And we think we are to attend to ourselves, not just to think about attending to ourselves and to think about how our attention is lost and everything. Just attend to ourselves. That is what we need to be so one-pointed that it's easy to get caught up in an inner dialogue. Oh, I lost my attention. Now I must regain my attention. That's missing the point. We simply have to turn our attention back to ourselves. Otherwise, we're thinking about what we should be doing rather than doing it.
Yeah, that is kind of the interesting paradox. The teaching in itself is so extremely simple.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, the mind can make it very complicated.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. This is a different question. Any thoughts too on Maharshi's comment on parallel realities, although ultimately futile? It's interesting that likely all realms of existence exist within the dream the ego creates, and the answer is already in there. Yeah.
I've never heard of Bhagavan talking of parallel realities. According to Bhagavan, only one thing is real, and you are that. Everything else is unreal. In a dream, everything is possible, but it's all still a dream.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go to the next question from another person. When you say focus on I, on what do you mean to focus? Shall I read the whole question because they're kind of related?
Yeah. I think this is one that needs a whole.
When you say focus on I, on what do you mean to focus? Turning within, I only find sensations, emotions, and thoughts, and nothing else. Then on these I have to focus, as Jida Krishnamurti and Jean Klein also have told, or nothing to focus, just be focusing nothing particular. By the way, because there was a little while that I focused on Jida Krishnamurti, and he didn't necessarily only say to focus on the feelings and emotions, but on that what is aware of it. So that is a slight different approach to that. Yeah.
if we are aware of thoughts, feelings, emotions, and so on, that is not turning within in the sense that Bhagavan talks about turning within. These are all phenomena, and phenomena are all outside. They're external to ourselves. So turning within means turning our attention to I alone. And I is not nothing. That is, who is aware of all those thoughts, feelings, emotions, and so on? If you say, I'm only aware of these, who is that I who is only aware of these? It's that I we have to turn our attention back to. We are not nothing. We are the only thing that is real. But because our attention, we are so habituated to allowing our attention to go outwards to other things, we have given more reality to other things than to ourselves, the one in whose view all those other things appear. If we were, could anything appear if we were not aware of its appearance? So who am I who is aware of this? Everything appears in the space of awareness. The I we are to attend to is that space of awareness. Like the picture on which the screen on which the picture is projected in a cinema. Whether the pictures appear or disappear, the screen is always there. So we have to focus on that screen, that is on that background awareness. So it's not nothing, it's the only thing. It's the only thing that is real. The pictures, all the phenomena that appear, all the thoughts, feelings, perceptions, memories, emotions, all these things, these are all just fleeting appearances. What is real is that, well, relative to all these things, what is real is the seer, knower of all these things. Because all these things appear and disappear in the view of the knower. But even the knower is not the ultimate reality. The reality of the knower is the ultimate reality. The knower is ego, which appears in waking and dream and disappears in sleep. That from which it appears and into which it disappears, namely our own being, that alone is the reality. So it is not at all attending to nothing, nor is it attending to anything. It's not attending to this thing or that thing. It's attending to that to which all things appear. That in whose view all things appear and disappear.
A lot of sages will talk about what you and I will say the fullness or oneself, ourself. A lot of sages refer to that as nothingness. I grant you conceptually it isn't nothingness, but a lot of people, they're using the same referent with a different word, same sense with a different word.
I can't understand how a sage can refer to it as nothing, because it's so obviously, it is the only thing ultimately.
Well, one way of saying it is just what you said. It's no thing.
It's no thing, but it's not nothing. There's a very big difference. It's not a thing in the sense, it's not any object or phenomenon, but it is that to which all objects and phenomena appear.
A lot of people will say it's nothing and everything. A lot of people across different traditions.
Okay, but yeah, we need to go beyond the words and understand what is behind the words. But if we think it is nothing, then, like people often ask, then am I to attend to nothing? If you think you have to attend to nothing, then you've missed the point. Because if you try to attend to nothing, you end up in layer. But unless to go beyond layer, to bypass layer and go to nasa, we need to attend to ourselves.
So I would just say that if anyone sees the word nothing, just recognize that it's a synonym for ourself.
Or the person talking is confused, one or the other. But there's a lot of confusion out there.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, in English, we have this term nothing, which etymologically means no thing. So we can play on the word a little bit in English, but in many languages, nothing means nothing. And so to say it is nothing is misleading. It is the only thing. And it's not even it. It's I am I. It's not a third person. It's a reality of the first person.
May I read?
So in order to investigate what we actually are, we first need to clearly understand. This is where understanding correctly is so important. We need to understand what it is we're to investigate. We're not here to investigate thoughts, feelings, emotions. We're not here to investigate anything that appears and disappears. Whatever appears and disappears is unreal. We are to attend to that which never appears nor disappears, which is eternally shining. That is our own being, I am. That is what we have to attend to. Yes, Sean, you were saying something?
Oh, I was going to ask if I could read something because you just reminded me about it. It's in Happiness and the Art of Being. I have some friends who watch this and they would be curious to know what you have to say about this. So that's why I'm going to ask this. So I'm going to paraphrase it slightly, but it's quoted on page 31 of the introduction to Happiness and the Art of Being. You say, true salvation can only be attained ... through the Spirit, which is Jesus Christ, the eternal Spirit I am that exists within each one of us. I am is the reality of God.
Yeah. Yeah. God cannot be an object, nor can he be the subject, because the subject and object, it's a duality. God is the reality of the subject. That is, God is pure being. And pure being is pure awareness. So pure being always is aware of itself. Being aware of oneself means being aware of I. I is the name of the first person, that which is aware. So as Bhagavan said, I am is the first name of God, it's the natural name of God. There is no God other than I am, and there's no I am other than God.
And Rhonda quotes you on the first page of chapter 1 in The Greatest Secret as saying, the truth lies at the heart of every religion.
Yeah. I think there's a verse in Gurvacha Kukavai where Bhagavan says something like that. If there was not at least some mention of the ultimate truth, that we ourselves are God, that God is not anything other than ourselves, that religion would lack any life. In Christianity, Christ says, the kingdom of God, look, see, the kingdom of God is within you. That's clearly he's directing us to look within, because only within is the reality. That is, the reality cannot be an object, so it cannot be out there among all these objects. It can only be within the subject. The essence of the subject, that the being and the awareness of the subject, that is the reality. Everything else is just an appearance. So that being awareness is what we have to investigate. And that is what is ever shining in us as I am, our own being. That person who asked the question said, when I look within, I see only thoughts, feelings, emotions, and so on. Who is that I who is looking within? It's not really looking within. So long as you're seeing all these things, you're still looking outside. But who is the I who is looking? Who is the I who is looking for I? I is something that, but one thing we all know, that the most basic, we couldn't be aware of anything without being aware I am. Because being aware entails being aware that we're aware, and being aware that we're aware means being aware that we exist. So we won't find it among anything. In fact, in the gospel, if you read it deeply, what Christ says, he says, they will say, look here, look there. But I say, look, see, the kingdom of God is within you. That means stop looking here and there. You're not going to find God or Brahman or the reality or happiness or anything you see. You're not going to find it outside. You can only find it by looking within. Looking within means looking at ourself alone.
When I was younger, I studied A Course in Miracles. I know some of us have, like Ted, for example, I heard him say. And there's a line in there. There's a few things that stayed with me that I like from that book. And one of them says something like, you have heard it said that the kingdom of God is within you. One word needs to be changed. God is you.
Yeah, but all these are pointers, so we don't need to change the words. That the kingdom of God is within you is a pointer, just like God is you is a pointer. There is actually no such thing as God other than you. How can we know God if we don't even know ourselves? How can we know anything if we don't know ourselves? If our knowledge of ourself is a mistaken knowledge, our knowledge of anything else will be equally mistaken. So the first thing we need to know is, who am I? What we actually are. Now we know ourselves as, I am this person, I am this body. So everything else that we know is colored by this false awareness.
May I bring up one other subject briefly related? You've said recently a few times, which I don't think you used to say this, Michael, but correct me if I'm mistaken. You say, I is transpersonal, neither personal nor impersonal. That's a unique statement. I've maybe heard only one other person speak about it that way, but because oftentimes, like in the Western religions, it's like it's personal, and then you often hear the Eastern religions characterized as impersonal. So I was really kind of shocked a little bit when I first heard you say, we're not impersonalists. You said we're transpersonalists, if you like.
Yeah, that's something it's not a new thing I've said it often, but one context in which I say that is in the context of ISKCON. The ISKCON followers have been programmed to believe that all Advaitins are impersonalists, which is a complete misrepresentation of Advaita. So in that context, I often say, we are neither personalists nor impersonalists. Even transpersonalists, it's beyond all these differences. What is real cannot be limited in any way. That's why it's called anivachaniya. It's inexpressible. And why the ISKCON philosophy, if they understand their philosophy, it's said to be achintya. It's inconceivable. So we have to go, like all conceptions are mental. We have to go beyond the mind. Beyond the mind means back within, to the source of all knowledge, the source of all awareness, our own awareness, that fundamental awareness I am. How can that be called personal or impersonal? Transpersonal is the closest we can get to it, but even that is a limitation. We have to go beyond all these. We have to see beyond the words. The words are just pointers.
Coming back to this question, and you just saying words are just pointers, because this person we talked about had to focus on nothing. I would like to ask you the follow-up question.
Can I just say something in that connection? Words are pointers, but we need to be very careful to understand what they're pointing at. And some words point more effectively than others.
Yes.
That is, words are important, but we shouldn't limit ourselves by the words. We should understand the words correctly and go beyond the words to what they're pointing at. But if it's the wrong words chosen, then we get into confusion.
Yeah. Well, related to that, I wanted to ask a follow-up question.
Can I just say one more thing? Sorry. Though Bhagavan said the truth cannot be revealed through words, ultimately it can be revealed only through silence. Nevertheless, Bhagavan was a master at using words, and he used words very carefully. So his words are very important, because if we don't understand his words correctly, we won't be able to understand what it is he's teaching us, and so we won't be able to put it into practice. His words are pointers, but it's very important to understand that they're the best words for pointing at what he's pointing at, but it's up to us to understand what he is pointing at. That is why they say it's not just a matter of sravana. Sravana literally means hearing, but I mean taking in the teachings, hearing, reading, or studying the teachings. That's just the beginning. Then we need to make sense of them. We need to do manana. We need to think about it carefully and understand. When Bhagavan says, investigate who am I, and when he says self-investigation, Atma-vichara, is nothing but keeping the mind always fixed on oneself, we need to understand what he means by oneself, what he means by I. So we need to think carefully about it and make sense of these words. Understand at what he is pointing. Then only we can do the nididhyasana, putting it into practice. If we haven't understood the teachings properly, how can we apply them in practice properly? And it's up to each one of us to think about it and make sense of it for ourselves. No one can understand it for us. We each have to understand it ourselves. And once we've understood it, then we need to put it into practice. That's the most important thing of all. Because merely understanding is not sufficient. Understanding is necessary in order to be able to put it into practice effectively. But mere understanding is insufficient if we don't actually apply that understanding in practice. Yes, sorry, Sandra, I was interrupting you twice when you were trying to say something.
Yeah, but what you said is extremely important. So thank you for that clarification. And because I wanted to do a follow-up on the nothingness, because I'm aware that there can be a lot of misunderstanding about that. Even better, I think I also had that starting this path. So the verses that I quoted earlier about Guru Vachaka Kofai are from a chapter called The Ever Direct Experience.
Yes.
And then I shared some verses in the Facebook group that we're having, and then someone responded like, there is no such direct experience. Nothing is there, nothing being experienced. But that seems to me like not the full understanding.
It's not an object to be understood. It's not an object to be experienced. But we're experiencing the reality of the subject. So it's not experience in the usual sense of the term. In the usual sense of the term, you've got an experiencing subject, an experienced object, and a means of experiencing, a triputi. But it's not experiencing in that sense, but it's experiencing in the sense of that clear awareness of ourself as we actually are. And talking about nothingness, Bhagavan was very, very explicit. That is, the Sanskrit word for nothing is sunya. Sunya means zero, void, empty, non-existent. The Tamil equivalent of sunya is par. Par means dissolution, destruction, nothing. Bhagavan says in verse 12 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, par andru. He says it's devoid of knowledge and ignorance, meaning knowledge and ignorance of anything other than ourselves. And there's nothing there to know or to not know, or to know or to make known. There's that alone, but he says par andru. It is not a void. It is not nothing. It is not. It's not nothing. It's the closest we can come to saying it in English.
But we have to understand that these are the very words that the Buddhists use. So it's important to clarify their meaning in light of Ramana's teachings.
Yes, but there's a lot of confusion in Buddhism because a lot of Buddhists say there's no such thing as self, which itself is a huge confusion because they're taking self to be a thing. Again, it's what Buddha said, what repeated several times in the Pali Canon is sabbe dhamma anatta, which translated into Sanskrit is sarva dharma anatma. That means all dharmas are not self. Dharma there means is used in the sense of phenomena. Everything that is held together, everything that is constructed. So all dharmas are not oneself. He didn't say there is no self. To say there's no self is meaningless because there's not a thing called self. Everything is itself. This PC is itself. You are yourself. I am myself. So I and myself are not two different things. So if you deny self, you're denying existence because every existing thing is itself, or everything that seems to exist is itself. But in the context of the spiritual context, Atma is often used to refer to ourself, what we actually are. So when Buddha said all phenomena are an Atma, he means what we are is not any phenomenon. He's not saying that a phenomenon is not itself. Obviously, everything is itself, but it's not ourself. So this body is itself, but it's not ourself. It's not what we are. So to talk about no self it's a meaningless. It's actually meaningless. There can't be. You can't deny self without denying the thing whose self it is, because it's not even to say whose self it is, but the thing that the self is, that everything is itself. So that it's because of reifying the meaning of the word Atma or self, which many Vedantins also do, and thereby get into confusion. It's best to consider Atman as a pronoun rather than a noun. In some senses, it's used as a noun, but generally, fundamentally, it's a pronoun. So it means myself, yourself, himself, herself, itself.
You've explained it before that Buddhism and Ramana's teachings are compatible. We would just say, as far as I understand, that anatma would be no ego.
Well, anatma means, well, no, I don't even think, that's not what Buddha said. When he says all phenomena are not oneself, anatta means not oneself in that context. So he's denying that we are any phenomenon. That absolutely is Bhagavan's teaching. But many Buddhists, many of our Buddhist philosophers and interpreters, they make a big thing of this anatma, and they take anatma to be no self, whereas anatma means not self. A theist is not someone who denies the existence of theists. It is someone who is not a theist. just like that. Ajnana is not knowledge. It doesn't mean no knowledge. It means not knowledge. Anatma means not self, not no self.
But I mean, since the Buddhists, like the Zen Buddhists, for example, are keen to use words like nothing, void all day long. That's how sunyata is emptiness. They use these words all day long.
Yeah,
I mean, I think it's important rather than just say it's wrong to clarify what it means in Bhagavan's terms.
What they understand by that is we have to question. I'm not saying they're wrong, but I would question what they mean by that.
There are certainly Zen patriarchs and jnanis in the Zen Buddhist tradition, and they certainly know what they're talking about without question.
There's nothing that is certain except I am.
Right.
We have all sorts of beliefs about other things. We are not here to judge the spiritual state of others. But we do need to discriminate about teachings. Are the teachings serving a purpose? Are they giving clarity or not? If they're creating confusion, then they're not serving their purpose. A spiritual seeker is a seeker of clarity. And ultimately, clarity cannot be found merely in words. But in the process of seeking clarity, we need clear words, clear pointers to know where to look. And I'm not just criticizing Buddhists. I would criticize a lot of so-called Advaitins because they don't understand the practical implication of the philosophy they're talking about. And they often say things like, I mean, think some of the analogies that Advaitins use. They say, just like the eye cannot see itself, the eye meaning the physical eye, cannot see itself, we cannot know herself. But the eye is jada, that's why it doesn't know itself. But awareness always knows itself. It's swayam prakasa, self-shining. So there's a lot of confusion, even among Advaitins. So I'm not picking on Buddhists or picking on anyone. What we want is clarity. If the words give clarity, they're useful. Bhagavan gives us clarity, and as part of his giving us clarity, he says parandru. It is not a void. It is not nothingness. Because
I mean, I agree with that.
That concept creates a huge amount of confusion.
I agree with that, especially in the I don't know how it works in other languages, but especially in the context of English. Like people are quick to say, as soon as you say void, you'll say, well, it's actually not a void, it's a fullness, for example. Yeah. Or they'll say emptiness, fullness at the same time, because it's empty of concepts and abiding as it truly is. We are that.
Yeah. It's empty of content. It's full of itself. But it's the fullness which needs to be emphasized, because if you start emphasizing the emptiness, but even the idea of emptiness, there has to be something in order to be empty. So it's again, you end up in just getting caught up in words and confusion. We should always remember what we're seeking is clarity. If the words give us clarity, well and good. If they confuse us or point us in the right direction, that's not good.
But that something, we both agree there is that something, but we also both agree that something is no thing.
It's not no thing in the sense that it's not an object, it's not a phenomenon, but it is the only thing.
Right.
The only thing that is real.
Right.
Well, I also noticed there's power in words, because if you say it like that, how you just said it, that really captures my heart. It's really beautiful.
Yeah.
If there is, I guess, the correct understanding of what is said. Yeah. So we're ready for the next question?
Yes.
Still have a couple to go. Are you still okay, Michael, with your energy?
Yeah.
Next question from Steve. Please, could Michael talk on the connection between annihilation and awareness investigation, Atma-vichara, as I have heard Michael say Bhagavan's approach is a gently way of practicing, or gentle approach, and how that gentle way relates to Bhagavan's teaching, translated into English, as and when thoughts appear, then and wait a minute, there should be more, but I'm not seeing it.
As and when thoughts appear, it's necessary to annihilate them then and there in the place of their rising. In the 11th paragraph of Nana. Yes, but are we able to do that? Most of us are not able to do that. We may be able to do it for a few moments, but then our attention again slips out. So in order to get to that point where we're able to annihilate every thought as and when it rises, we need constant practice. But we'll succeed only by, that is, we are slowly to wean our mind off its outward going inclinations. So we have to be gentle but firm. In the chapter 6, verse 25 of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna begins with the word sane, which means gradually, slowly. Bhagavan has translated that verse into Tamil, and in which he says mella. And what is we are to do slowly, gently, gradually, is to bring the mind to stillness. How do we do that? By Atma-samsta manakritva na kinchit api chintayat. Fix your mind on yourself. Do not think of anything else. So it's Krishna, in the verse where he's specifically talking about the practice of Atma-vichara, without actually using the word Atma-vichara, but clearly talking about the practice, he uses the term sane. And that's one of the verses that Bhagavan chose to translate into, selected and chose to translate into Tamil. So gently doesn't mean in a half-hearted way. It means gently but firmly, gentle persistence. We can't achieve this overnight, but we need to gradually wean ourselves off our outward going inclinations. And ultimately, all thoughts will be destroyed, annihilated, only when their root is annihilated. The root is ego. So we need to work towards that. Gradually, gently, but firmly, persistently. I hope that's an adequate answer to that question.
Well, if Steve wants to do a follow-up question, he participates many times in the meeting, so he can do that.
Yeah.
The next question is from Michael Dillon, and he asks, I would like to find out how the detail of Bhagavan's journey from Madurai to Arunachala was reported.
Who else can report that? Only Bhagavan reported it. Not till many years later, but people would have asked him, and he would occasionally talk about such things.
Okay, the follow-up, the next question is, let me see, from Mike. This might have gotten answered before, but I couldn't find it. The foreword of Elam Andre says that Ramana gave Annamalai Swami a short list of 6 books: Kavalya Navanitam, Ribu Gita, Ashtavakra Gita, Elam Andre, Swarupa Saram, and Yoga Vashistam. He laid particular stress on Elam Andre. Have you come across this as an accurate list of texts favored by Ramana? And what are your thoughts on the Elam Andre and on Ashtavakra Gita, the latter being a new favorite of mine?
Elam Andre is a very minor and not a very clear text. It was written, I think, sometime in the 19th century. It's really not a very good expression. I don't know whether Bhagavan actually ever recommended that. Bhagavan, it seems from reports, he did recommend certain texts for people, what was appropriate for the, because not everyone is able to understand the deepest teachings. So he would sometimes maybe suggest certain texts that would be more easily digestible, understandable by those people. Rubu Gita is a very good primer in the sense that it's dinning in repeatedly the basic, some of the basic principles, not the deepest principles, but at least some of the basic principles of Advaita. So people used to chant that in Bhagavan's presence. But you will never hear Murugana or Sadhu Om or anyone, or Natanananda, anyone who's gone deep into Bhagavan's teachings, saying that Bhagavan recommended these works. Bhagavan has given us the truth far more clearly and in a far more practical way in texts like Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, Upadesha Atma-vichara, Nana, and so on. So if we have Bhagavan's text, we really don't need any of these older texts. But not everyone has the maturity to understand and really to really deeply understand works like Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu is a very practical text. It's also a very simple text if we have the clarity to understand it. But many people are not able to understand it. I remember once when I was saying something about Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu is such a practical text. Someone replied to me, I didn't think Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu was practical at all. It seemed to me to be all just theory. But it's all about practice. I mean, everything Bhagavan teaches us in Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu has a practical implication if we understand it correctly. So people like Annamalai Swami didn't have a very deep understanding of Bhagavan's teaching. As is clear, if you read the I think there's some book of Annamalai Swami, some book has recorded Annamalai Swami's sayings.
Living by the words of Bhagavan.
Living by, yeah, and that and final talks or something like that. There are several, maybe one or two, I don't know. But if I haven't read any of those books, but people have quoted to me passages from those books. And it's very clear from those books that Annamalai Swami has a very limited understanding of Bhagavan's teachings. Generally, the practice he is advocating in those books and what he says Bhagavan taught him is basically Soham Bhavana. That is the meditation, I am Brahman, I am he, I am consciousness. That is not Bhagavan's teachings. And Bhagavan didn't recommend that. In Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, he very clearly says that is an aid, but is it the vichara? Meaning it is not the vichara. So everyone understands Bhagavan at their own level. And Bhagavan also, in talks it's recorded, but when Yogananda, who started the Self-Realization Fellowship in America and wrote Autobiography of a Yogi, in the 1930s he came to Bhagavan. And one of the questions he asked Bhagavan was, what teaching should be given for the uplift of the masses? Bhagavan replied, teachings cannot be given en masse. Teaching has to be according to the taught. In other words, different teachings are appropriate for different people according to their level of spiritual development. So if Bhagavan may have recommended certain texts to Annamalai Swami because that is what he was able to, he would at least be benefited at that level by reading those books. But that is, we can't say Bhagavan universally recommended these books to everyone. Bhagavan generally didn't I mean, if Bhagavan wanted to recommend, there's so many much better texts to recommend, but Bhagavan generally wasn't in the business of recommending this or that. Bhagavan, of his own accord, never gave any teachings. He only gave teachings when people asked him. So rather than concerning ourselves about all these old books, let's look at Bhagavan's teachings, see what Bhagavan has brought. It's the essence of Advaita, which is the essence of Vedanta, which is the essence of all spirituality, but he's expressed it in a far clearer and far more practical way than it has ever been expressed before. So leaving aside what Bhagavan himself has given us, going by, because some person said that Bhagavan recommended this book or that book, it's really these books like Ribu Gita is good in the sense it's a good primer, but it's very, very basic. Ella Mondre, from what I can remember, is not even a very good expression of Advaita. So I find it very hard to believe that Bhagavan actually recommended Ella Mondre. It's really not a good. I can't remember now. It's many years since I read it, but it's really not a good. I don't think I've ever read it in Tamil. I did once see a Tamil copy and I read a little, and it really didn't seem to me to have anything. And then I later read an English translation that someone had produced. And if the English translation was even remotely accurate, there's a lot in there that I would seriously question whether Bhagavan would recommend that at all. But who knows? Who am I to judge? But I wouldn't attach any importance to these people who say Bhagavan recommended this, Bhagavan recommended that. He may have for certain individuals recommended certain things that would be suitable to them. But it's not we shouldn't take it as a universal recommendation.
Yeah, what I would like to add to that is I'm aware, of course, of those books that supposedly Bhagavan advised Annamalai Swami to read, and I agree with you. I also thought Elam Andre didn't make sense for me. By the way, I do love Kaivalya Navanita, Ribu Gita, and
Kaivalya Navanita is that's the sort of standard Tamil primer well, more than a primer. It's a bit more advanced than Ribu Gita, certainly.
Yeah.
It goes a bit more deep into the subject.
Yeah, and also like Ashtavakra Gita. But what I wanted to say especially is that what I'm becoming aware of on this path is there are so many beautiful books, for example, also like Padamalai, and some other books that are contributed to Muruganar. But what I'm kind of becoming aware of is, and I've read a lot, and I think that is you even confirmed that also at a certain stage on your path. We have read a lot of books. But nowadays I'm becoming more and more aware that books can also be distractions, and like clinging onto books while, for example, nothing else matters than paragraph 6 of Nanyar, to keep the mind continuously on oneself.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
So I guess everyone at a certain moment arrives on a stage that you kind of feel of letting go certain books, and because that's still a form of the mind turning outwards. As I said, you can't find the self in books.
I wouldn't even say I've read a lot. I often feel I'm very poorly read. I've read a little of many things, but not really gone deep into it. The only thing I've gone deep into is Bhagavan's teachings. And in the light of Bhagavan's teachings, when people quote things from here and there, then I come to know about these things, and some things fit very nicely with Bhagavan's teaching. Some things are not so satisfactory once we once we know Bhagavan's teachings. Oh, that reminds me of one thing. What Sadhu Om said when people used to ask Sadhu Om whether it's true that Bhagavan recommended Rubu Gita and this book and that book. Sadhu Om said, if you have enjoyed a rich feast and someone offers you some stale food, some old food, after eating a rich feast, you won't feel inclined to eat anything. Even if somebody offers you the richest food, you wouldn't feel inclined to eat it. You'll feel even less inclined to eat stale food. After we've feasted on Bhagavan's teachings, everything else seems insipid in comparison.
May I just say really quick, if anyone speaks Dutch, Sandra has translated Annamalai Swami into Dutch. I also would like to say, Michael, didn't you say to me once that Sadhu Om recommended to you the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna?
Yeah, he did. He said it's a book that everyone should read. That's one book that I did read. He loved, I mean, you can't help loving Ramakrishna. He's really, and if you, though superficially, he seems to talk a lot about a lot of things, but if you see the underlying essence of what he's saying, it's very much in tune with what Bhagavan is teaching us. Oh, you were saying, I didn't know, Sandra, that you translated Annamalai Swami into Dutch. Do you, presumably at that time, you had a certain view of it. Do you still feel the same about it that you felt when you translated it?
Well, I translated two books before I started with compiling the books based on your explanations, because at that time I was not ready, I guess, for the way how you were explaining it.
Yeah.
So I could see it as an immediate step to be able to go directly to Bhagavan's teachings. I still think it's beautiful because Annamalai Swami has a way of speaking that is, in a way, very simple and direct. I do recognize what you say about he's having that bhavana, like saying, I'm not the mind, I'm not the body, I'm pure consciousness. So that feels very much for me like the Ribhu Gita.
Yeah.
But he also does emphasize the extreme importance of doing self-investigation. So you helped me a lot in getting a deeper understanding, even in a philosophical way, which I think is very, very important for in doing Shravana and having like Shravana and Manana and doing the correct way of Nididhyasana. But personally, I recently just read the first chapter and I thought in final talks like, it's kind of all in here, but I guess a deeper understanding does help with that. So I still love it. Yeah. But just like I said, it's
as I say, I've never read entirely, but people often quote to me portions from that.
Yeah, and if you just see a specific portion.
Yeah. And a lot of it, most of the things that have been quoted to me have seemed to me to be not at all a deep understanding of Bhagavan's teachings, not to be showing a deep understanding of Bhagavan's teachings.
I guess people who quote certain parts of Annamalai Swami is, of course, related to their own understanding and it resonates with them.
Yeah.
But there are certainly parts in Annamalai Swami where he talks about the actual essence in my understanding. So it does resonate with me. But it's I guess every spiritual teacher or Jani or however you want to call them have their own specific flavor in words and in talking about the teaching, just as you do. I know I guess you're aware of that.
Yeah.
And it either resonates in you or not, or I think as long as it's helpful. But I do agree with you that Bhagavan's writings itself has everything. It's like the complete Upanishad with endless verses. Yeah. So
it might be interesting to talk about briefly, Michael. You say that we should be selective in what we choose to read, and I never knew that you didn't read Annamalai Swami, and I recall a while back Sandra was reading the Power of the Present series, and you mentioned, oh, you have it, but you hadn't read it. That's very interesting to me that even like Bhagavan-related books, you haven't even taken the time to look at. So can you talk about selective reading?
For me, what's most important is Bhagavan's original writings. When in the early days, I read most of the books that were available then. So I read talks many times. I read Day by Day many times, letters from Sri Ramana, Maharshi's Gospel. I don't know how many times. Well, I probably not read it from cover to cover for many, many years, but I'm very familiar with Maharshi's Gospel because it's quite a small book. I mean, there were many fewer books in those days than there are now, but really, once I started to go deeper into Bhagavan's teachings and Guru Vachika Kavai and Bhagavan's original works, the other things, I mean, a lot of these things, when I read, I don't find the translations very satisfactory. Even now there are several books of translations of Murugan, but I always want to compare with the original, and I often find, they're okay at a certain level, but they're not such. I mean, Murugan is very, very deep, very subtle, and often I feel the translations, to my mind, are not doing justice to him. But I can see that it's much better to have Murugan in a poor translation than no Murugan at all. His works are truly wonderful. So yeah, as I say, I'm not very widely read. And as far as classical texts on Vedanta, I think the only classical text I've read fully is perhaps Bhagavad Gita. I read a translation many years ago. Now I'm familiar with certain parts of it, particularly the verses Bhagavan has translated. Vivekachudamani, I read it in its entirety, but not really outside what Bhagavan himself has translated. I've not really read very much. But I pick up a lot. I'm familiar with a lot of the Upanishads, but from hearsay more than that I've actually read them. For example, the story of Nachiketas and all these things, those I'm familiar with. Oh, I probably read the Mandukya Upanishad, which is the easiest one. It's only some 12 mantras or something. It's not, so I'm pretty familiar with that one. I think I've probably read the whole of Mandukya Karikas, but many, many years ago.
David Godman was recently on Ramana Maharshi Foundation UK, and he was talking about Muruganar and Muruganar books, and we love those books. I mentioned to you once before on one of our videos a long time ago that Padamalai was actually the book that made me a Ramana devotee.
Yeah. David's first talk was on Mastan. That was a really nice talk. I really enjoyed that. The talk on Murugan, I began to listen to it, but when I had other things to do, I wasn't able to listen to it fully. So I heard a little bit of that.
Are you ready to continue with the next?
Yes.
Okay, we still have like two to go, but two persons. But this question, it's a couple of questions, but I just read them all because they seem to be related, and then you can choose if you want to answer them one by one. Is embodied existence inherently bad? Why does the world of multiplicity seem to exist for no reason? As children, we found the world to be such a pleasant place. Now it seems to be a prison, and the only way out is to turn against the world, to my own self. Is all this creation for nothing?
Yes, embodied existence is inherently defective. Firstly, the body is born, it grows, we grow older, we undergo so many experiences, we're susceptible to death, to disease, accidents, and eventually this body is going to die. So the embodied existence is inherently defective. Someone recently mentioned to me the Christian belief, or certain Christians believe that when we go to heaven, we'll have this same body, but it'll be about 20 years old, and we'll live eternally as youthful. And wouldn't that be an attractive state? I said, no, it wouldn't be. That is, if we understand what we actually are is infinite Satchidananda. Anadi Ananta Kanda Satchidananda, as Bhagavan says in verse 28 of Upadesha. Anadi means beginningless. Ananta means endless and limitless, so it's infinite. Akhanda means unbroken, it's undivided, it's not, we are one single indivisible whole, infinite, eternal, Satchidananda. When such is our nature, to limit ourselves as a body, it's inherently an unsatisfactory state. That is, when we limit ourselves, we can never experience the unlimited happiness that we actually are. What we actually are is infinite happiness. But when we limit ourselves, we cannot experience what is infinite so long as we are finite. So embodied existence is inherently defective. And we seem to be embodied only when we rise as ego. And as ego, we have so many vasanas, desires, likes, dislikes, and so on. So it's a intrinsically unsatisfactory state. In fact, the very nature of ego is dissatisfaction, because nothing can satisfy us other than infinite happiness, because that is what we actually are. But as ego, we can never experience that infinite happiness. So yes, the embodied existence is inherently unsatisfactory. Why all this? Bhagavan said that's the wrong question to ask, because all this appears to whom? To us as ego. If we investigate ego, we'll find there's no such thing. So then the question why becomes redundant. It's only so long as we take the experience to be real, the appearance to be real, we want to know why. But if it's not real, if it seems to exist only in the view of ego, which is itself not actually existent, the question why becomes redundant. If we investigate ego, there is no such thing, and therefore there is no world, no creation, nothing. That alone is the truly satisfying state. Have I answered all the questions? I can't remember whether there was
still a question. And as children, we found the world to be such a pleasant place. Now it seems to be a prison, and the only way out is to turn against the world. To my own
I think we're not to turn against the world. We've got nothing against the world. We are to turn away from the world, turn back towards ourselves. That's probably what the person meant, but people who aren't so familiar with English may express it in that way. But we're not. We shouldn't have the attitude that we're against the world. We've got nothing against the world. Let the world be as it is, but it's not for us. We are seeking to know what is real.
Yeah, and then the last question is all this creation for nothing.
Let's not worry about that. Let's first know what is real, and then we can worry about creation. Let's first find out what we ourselves are, and then we can worry about other things.
Yeah.
If we know what we ourselves are, then we'll have no concern about it. There'll be nothing else for us to know, as Bhagavan says.
I sometimes say with the why question, which kind of makes sense, of course, that you ask that question, but I sometimes say it's the illusion asking why it is an illusion.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
That's kind of,
Well, Bhagavan used to say it's like asking, why was the son of a barren woman was born?
Yeah.
How was he born?
Yeah.
Why is the circle a square?
Yeah.
How did the circle? How is it that the circle is a square? It's you're talking about a non-existent thing.
A hare with horns.
Exactly. Well, at least a hare could theoretically have a horn. There's nothing. There's nothing intrinsically illogical about a hare with horns, though that's often an analogy that is used. But the son of a barren woman is a logical impossibility. A square circle is a logical impossibility.
So we came to the last two questions asked by the same person. If someone is all the time aware of the self as a background awareness, irrespective of any given situation, and if that person feels that the doer of all activities is the self, does it mean that this person is enlightened?
No, because if they think the self is the doer, what is the self? There's no thing called the self. We are the self. So if we think we are the doer, we are in ignorance. Action is done by mind, speech, and body. Only when we rise as ego and take that mind, speech, and body to be ourself, consequently take that mind, speech, and body to be ourself, do we experience ourselves as the doer. So doership is the very nature of ego. If we give up ego, there is no doing at all. There is only being. So if we really were always aware of ourselves, as we actually are, we would not be aware of any doing at all. We would not be aware of anything other than ourselves.
Yeah, beautiful. That's something, by the way, that is said in the Ashtavakra Gita that I find very inspiring. That duality is that you have been bitten by the black snake of doership. Huh?
Yeah. But sometimes people ask questions like, how to act without doership? That itself is a meaningless question, because if you're acting, that means you've got the doership. As Bhagavan says in verse 38 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, if we are the doer of actions, we will experience the resulting fruit. But when one knows oneself by investigating who is the doer, all the three karmas will drop off. That is, the doership will depart and all three karmas will drop off. Doership will depart means, along with the doership, also the experiencership, of course, because they're both the nature of ego. Ego is the doer of action and the experiencer of the fruit. In the absence, when we investigate what we actually are, ego will cease to exist. So the doership and experiencership will cease to exist, and therefore all the three karmas will cease to exist. And this idea that the self is the doer of action, if by the self we mean what we actually are is pure being. It never does anything. It just is as it is, eternally, without undergoing any change whatsoever. Which brings us back to the starting point, which is where do we start off? Everything other than our own being, I am, is an illusory appearance that seems to exist only in the view of ourself as ego. So all such things seem to exist only when we rise and stand as ego, and hence none of them exist at all when we do not rise as ego. So all the questions we ask, they all arise only because we've risen as ego. So ultimately our aim should be to put an end to our rising as ego. Merely thinking I am consciousness is not sufficient. We have to be that consciousness. And how to be that consciousness, as Bhagavan says in verse 27 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, Nānudiāda Uλλinālai, Nāmaduvai Uλλinālai. The state in which I is without rising is the state in which we are that. That can mean Brahman, consciousness, whatever you want to say. How to, without investigating the place where I rises, in other words, without investigating our own being, the source from which we've risen as ego, how to attain the annihilation of oneself in which I does not rise. And without attaining that, and without attaining that annihilation of oneself, how to be in one's own state in which one is that. So merely thinking I am that, I am consciousness, I am Brahman, that's not going to get us there. We need to put an end to the rising of ego. And the only way to put an end to the rising of ego is to investigate the reality of ego, the place from which ego rises. If we investigate the reality of ego, as Bhagavan says in verse 14, ego will come to an end, and the first person will come to an end, and second and third persons will also come to an end. And what remains as one, that is what we actually are. So it's all, everything is so beautifully expressed in Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. If we understand Bhagavan's teachings correctly, there'll be no room for any more questions to arise.
Yeah, I agree with you, because sometimes I was a bit puzzled I started with using your explanations and translations with Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, which is not the easiest text in a way.
Yeah.
And then after that I did Nāņar, and which is for most people the first text to go to who am I.
Yeah.
But for me, I was very happy that Bhagavan through me, that I started with Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, because then it gives me a good philosophical understanding to be completely convinced about why the practice of who am I, self-investigation, is so extremely important. Yeah.
That is, Nana, who am I, is a very good introductory text.
Yeah.
But it is more than just an introductory text. It's an extremely deep text. And I don't think any of us understand its depth when we first read it. We get something out of it, but it's a text we can go on read. I mean, it's nearly 50 years since I first read it, and I still relish reading it, because there's so much in it, so much depth, so many things that I wouldn't have possibly been able to recognize or comprehend when I first read it. But it's an Akshaya Patra. There's in the Puranas, there's a cooking vessel, but it's a self-replenishing cooking vessel. So there's always abundant food in it. Nana, Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, Upadeshundya, Atma-vichara, Arunacha Stuti Panchakam, all these works of Bhagavan, they are all individually and collectively, each one is an Akshaya Patra. Each one is an Akshaya Patra, and all together are an Akshaya Patra, because they give so much, and we can go on feeding on them for years and still being nourished by them. That's why, as Sadhu Om said, it's very difficult to appreciate other texts, even good texts like Kaivalya Navanitam or Kaivalya Navanitam, Ashtavakra Gita. These are all good texts, but somehow they all seem a bit insipid after we've relished Bhagavan's teachings. No offense meant, but it's hard to relish other things when we've eaten the rich food that Bhagavan has served us and is continually serving us.
Especially if we see him as our Sadguru, like
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was beautifully added. Are we ready for the last question, at least in the comments?
Okay. Yes.
How do we evaluate the progress on this path? What are the sure signs?
Bhagavan said there's only one way of um, of knowing one's progress. He said, perseverance is the only sign of progress. Because perseverance is the measure of our bhakti. If we truly love to know and to be what we actually are, we will be persevering in this path relentlessly. So if our perseverance is lacking, which I think if we're honest with ourselves, we all have to admit our perseverance is lacking, then our bhakti is lacking. And our progress is not as fast as it should be. But that said, we may not be progressing as much as we should. I mean, we may not be persevering as much as we should be, but at least every little effort we make on this path, as Bhagavan said, is worth any amount of effort made on any other path. Because this is the direct path. This is a path going direct back to ourselves. So every little effort made on this path is a step in the right direction. So we shouldn't be disheartened by the feeble nature of our perseverance, but we should continue persevering until our perseverance becomes stronger and stronger. In some book, I can't remember, in talks or somewhere, it's recorded that someone asked Bhagavan about sign of progress, and he said, you measure by the absence of thoughts or something.
Vasanas.
Not Vasa, I think it's thoughts, it's said in one place. But I think that is not a reliable recording. Firstly, because when Bhagavan says all of this is thoughts, how can we say that our thoughts are reducing? So it's it doesn't seem to be something that Bhagavan would say. But this thing I know he said, that the only true sign of progress is perseverance. That's a practical explanation. Because perseverance is all that is necessary. In Nana, he said, however many thoughts arise, so what? As and when each thought arises, it's necessary to investigate to whom it arises. So that's what's important, that persevering in investigating to whom all this appears. Let any number of thoughts appear, it doesn't matter to whom do they appear. The trouble is, in so many books, so many things are recorded, but often people are recording what they understand rather than what Bhagavan actually said. As Murugan said about talks, talks is a little bit of Bhagavan and a lot of Munagala. Munagala is the person who recorded it.
Just for reference, that's talk number 618. The degree of the absence of thoughts is the measure of your progress towards self-realization, but self-realization itself does not admit of progress. It is ever the same. The self remains always in realization. The obstacles are thoughts. Progress is measured by the degree of removal of the obstacles to understanding that the self is always realized. So thoughts must be checked by seeking to whom they arise. So you go to their source where they do not arise.
Yeah. Well, some of that is Bhagavan, and some of it is the understanding of the person who has recorded it.
Well, this was the last question asked in the comments. I don't have any questions anymore. I don't know if Sean still has a last question.
I would like to very briefly discuss Ajata. Would you please tell us about Ajata?
That is your answer. There's nothing to say about Ajata because silence alone is Ajata, eternal silence.
Beautiful.
And if people really
If you want to put it simply, what is Ajata? The opening phrase of verse 27 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, which is a phrase I really love, Nān uļḷadu nilai. Nan means I, uļḷadu means not rising. Ulla means what is, nilai means state. So it's the I not rising being state. In other words, the state in which I is without rising. Eternally, that is Ajata.
And that is our true nature.
Yeah. And that is what we should be seeking moment to moment. Just being without rising. And how to be without rising? Without investigating the place where I rises, as Bhagavan puts it there. In other words, without investigating our own being, without keeping our mind or attention fixed on our own being, how to achieve that state in which I does not rise, the state of annihilation of oneself.
Well, it seems we have come to the end of this meeting.
Yes, this short meeting.
This short meeting. So I think that is also like the energy of talking between friends about that, what we love the most.
Yes, yes.
That certainly is true for all of us.
Yes.
And we dedicated in each in our own way our lives to it.
Yes, yes.
So thank you very much, Michael,
Right.
for time and your energy and your clarification of Bhagavan's teaching.
Okay.
And we will meet for a 7th meeting, but that will be in time.
Yeah.
So, Namo Ramanaya.
Namo Ramanaya.
Namo Ramanaya.